Alright. BCA 101. This was Friday. Day 35 and security. And we have a number of security terms, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end some more about database. Alright. Data integrity. Data integrity is how accurate the data is. You can hash data into a set fixed length of information, for example, and then if you send some data between two locations and then hash it at the other end, if the hashes match, the data hasn't changed. Data integrity. Also securing data, like on, when it's stored, not just when it's, sent somewhere, when it's stored or while it's being processed. We need to make sure the data doesn't get changed. Confidentiality is where we make sure the data isn't copied. It's only viewed by those it's supposed to be viewed. You authenticate, make sure the data came from a reliable source, and so forth. So for people not to see the data, inappropriate people not to see the data, we can encrypt it. We can use advanced encryption system, DES, triple DES, and we do that with a key, and we already talked about public and private key pairs. Okay? Public and private key pairs. Alright. We need to make data available. If you didn't have to make it available, you wouldn't have to worry about those two up there. And we talked about the importance when you store data, and then data when it's being transmitted or being processed. We covered these. Authentication, we talked about already. Identifying who has access, and so we can do that by something you are, something you have, something you know, or some combination of those. Authorization is what you can do to the data. Can you just look at it? Can you change it? Can you send it? All these things, different people are authorized to see which data, who can see what data, and what they can do with it. And then this is all kept track of. So, as I mentioned before, sometimes you'll see it listed as AAA. Yeah, the computers keep track of who changed a file, who saw a file, what did they do with the file, okay, what places are you accessing, what websites, what news feeds. That data is being collected constantly. Okay? We talked a little bit about private addresses and public addresses, going from private networks to public networks. The idea that the addressing is private internally and then public. And when you move from website to website, the information can be encrypted, it can be secured, but where you're coming from and where you're going has to be available. People have to be able to see that. Some simple protections. Okay, what's in the news, really hot item now, are these VPNs. And picking the right VPN is really important. Okay, but you can purchase. They're not real expensive. They range from maybe $3 to $5 per month. And and what happens is you would leave. Let's say if you're on a VPN, you go home, you go to some other site where your VPN host, and then from that site you go out to the internet. Pure VPNs have a nice website. I'm not promoting those, but they have a nice website that explains how it works. You can have on your PC a firewall. Routers have firewalls. You can buy actual firewalls. And how they work is if you have a firewall set up on your PC or your network at home, it blocks all traffic trying to come in. So nothing can get in. Then when you send some traffic out, it knows enough to let that traffic back in. That's fundamentally how a firewall works. Now, people break in the systems a lot of times looking like legitimate users. Okay, so you can have software internally that's monitoring your network or your PC internally called intrusion prevention systems, sometimes abbreviated intrusion prevention systems. So once you can have software keeping track that once it sees something unusual happening within your computer or your network at business or whatever, it can take some steps. It can either stop the traffic, stop it, or it can monitor it, and so forth. All of us should be aware that you can have software to look for viruses, malware, and spyware. Software with malicious intent, malware. Spyware just watches what you're doing. In some cases, all browsers and some social media sites do that in general, but there can be spyware on your computer where it's actually recording keystrokes, and so it looks for you to keystroke in a password. Wireless is extremely popular. You notice you can get on the wireless at the college, you can get on the wireless, at McDonald's, at the coffee shop, and so forth. You need to be very careful when you're in a public Wi-Fi, because how do you connect? You'll connect to something, it's actually called an SSID. You'll see a word, and you'll say, it'll say it's open, and then you'll connect. Well, somebody could be in the coffee shop, and they could be running their own access point that's connected into the wireless there, and then they just use an SSID that looks like it's a legitimate one, and so you connect into theirs, and then they connect you to the internet, and so everything in between they can see. Now you can avoid issues with that if you are running a VPN. That's why these are going to be so extremely popular moving forward. Alright, so here we're going to talk a little bit about databases. And we talk about creating a table with all your information in it. They used to be called flat files. One table would hold tons of information. Well, these tables, often referred to by me as entities, we can actually create tables covering different entities. An entity might be faculty, another entity might be students, another entity might be courses. And then we can build a relationship between those. We try to draw that here. So you may have an entity, let's just use faculty as an example. So we could have a faculty ID number and their name, and these would be all fields, okay, or characteristics of the entity, and these would all define a faculty member, some number and some name and whatever information you want to store about faculty. We could have another table that has covers information about courses, maybe another table would be students, and then we could have a table covering this particular term, in which we could have, we'd have maybe a course ID, primary key here, and you can have a course ID, which would be a foreign key here, maybe a student ID here, and then maybe in this table a student ID here, primary key here, foreign key here. be a primary key. So this would show which course and which student was taking it. Now you could even do the same thing. Maybe this is a faculty ID. You could put a faculty ID here, primary key, foreign key, and which faculty number here. So you could track which students are taking which courses when. So the big thing here is these form what we call relationships. It's much easier to manage these tables as I've got here than it would be to manage one big table with all that information in it. So what we have is a relational database management system, which is extremely popular now. That's it.